Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Zach with an H. This is episode 18. We've got author Peter Swanson. If you want a good murder mystery, you really don't have to look much further. Excited, Peter, to dive into some of your work, to talk about your career, and to just have a great overall book talk today.
Thanks. Great. It's great to be here.
So, of course, the Peter Swanson we know now creates these exhilarating stories. We introduce characters in the first couple of chapters. We learn their motives. We find out somebody that wants them dead. And by the time the book is over, there's some of this and there's some of that. And you've learned a great deal about when people's dark thoughts kind of come out and when you see really just how it all works. But before we get to that, Peter, young Peter Swanson, what was the first thing that he wanted to do with his life?
Yeah, I'm thinking back to that. I wasn't like a fireman or anything that I was obsessed with. I probably, being a writer was there in my mind, and also being an artist, just because I loved to draw as a kid. But that was always a little bit tied in with storytelling. So I remember like being very young and writing like a little book about monsters, and I would draw the monster and then I would write like a little bit about them. So I think really from the get-go, I was so enamored with books. And of course, when you're enamored with books as a little kid, your books come with pictures. So they come with words and they come with pictures. So I was enamored with both. And, I think I just always kind of wanted to be a writer.
And so, of course, the first answer that would come to mind for yourself, and you're on the record saying this in many times, would be Agatha Christie. But who are some of the other authors?
Yeah, I mean, before Agatha Christie, there was the kids' book, the detective kids' books that I loved. I was always drawn to dark stories. So Roald Dahl was a big influence. Just, he had these fantastic tales, but they were often a little bit on the dark side. So I liked him. And then in terms of detective stuff, I loved Encyclopedia Brown. And, I went through Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew and all that. But, pretty early on, I was kind of a precocious reader. So I got into Ian Fleming when I was about 10. My dad had all the James Bond books. And then Agatha Christie, Stephen King, of course. And then any sort of mystery novels that were laying around my house, I kind of inhaled.
And what was it about that style that really drew you in?
I don't know. I think it's just it just appealed to me. I like kind of even picture books. Like Mercer Mayer was someone who wrote a lot about monsters, and I kind of love those books. I don't know what it is. I mean, it appealed to me. Maybe I think sometimes people think that if you like horror movies or you like horror books or scary stuff, it's because that stuff doesn't bother you. And I'm not sure that's true. I was definitely a kid who thought there were monsters under my bed, and was maybe a little nervous. So I think in a weird way, reading about it kind of was a way to exercise those demons. So, it's the same, I read Stephen King's Salem's Lot probably way too young. And it just, scared me to death. And I think there's two types of people: the people who read something scary when they're young and then never read something scary again. And then other people like me who want to go back to it, even though it was uncomfortable.
And then from there, you start at Trinity College in Connecticut. And so what was it, Peter, about Trinity College that you decided was a great place to get your professional journey going?
Yeah, I don't know if it was the beginning of my professional journey, but I mean, I was an English lit major, and I wanted to go to a liberal arts college. Trinity, I think, fit the bill. I actually quite liked, I was choosing between Trinity and Middlebury College, and I went to visit both of them. And I mean, I knew I wanted a small liberal arts New England college with a good English program. So they both had that. I think what Trinity had was quite a Gothic campus, actually. Even though it's in the midst of Hartford, it's kind of it had a kind of old English feel with like ivy on the walls and a kind of Gothic style chapel. So that kind of appealed to me. And yeah, that's where I ultimately chose.
And so, found an interview you had with Abe Loomis a couple of years ago, and you were talking about how, and you could tell me if this was a stretch or this is the truth. It's like an exact thing, but you'd write sometimes 10-page papers. You'd start 10 hours before they were due. So, how did your mind kind of go into overtime with these? And was this kind of the beginning and saying, yeah, I can make a lot of words in a little bit of time?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, it's embarrassing that I did that, but I used to do that, just because I was procrastinator, I guess, and if I had a 10-page paper due, I knew that I could write. Let's go back. I was a procrastinator, but I was also, and I'm kind of still the same way. Like I hate to be late, and I hate to hand in things late. If I'm given a deadline, I will meet that deadline. But I will also wait to the last possible moment. So I knew that I could write a page an hour. And so if it was a 10-page paper, I would just wait. I could put it off until 10 hours before it was due and then write a page an hour. And I would kind of write, I went to school in the 80s. There were you could go to a computer lab and do your paper on a computer and then print it out, which is what most people were doing. But I had a typewriter still, partly because I thought it was cool, to have a typewriter. But I used to type my papers. I typed all my papers in college directly into the typewriter, and I didn't do 2 drafts. So, and I don't, for whatever reason, I still managed to graduate. So that was a good thing.
What would you say, Peter, was the most lasting literary memory of your time as a Trinity Bantam?
Trinity Bantam. My most, I'm trying to remember the name of the professor and it just went out of my head, but I took a couple great classes, one in Hemingway short stories. It was Neil Smith, I think. I think he was an older professor. I think he's no longer with us. That was great, the Hemingway short story course. And I took another course with him, which was, it was on 3 writers, oddly enough, 3 writers who had all converted to Catholicism. So it was Evelyn Waugh, the English writer, Graham Greene, the English writer, and Muriel Spark as well. So I think it was called Green Waugh Spark. That was very memorable. So Professor Smith, he was a great professor, and he did my my thesis paper as well.
Okay, and so, Peter, we go from Trinity to the early years post-college. So that takes us to Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Where you went to be the project manager at a nonprofit. So was that something that it's an opportunity to start your career? Was it supposed to be a stepping stone, or was it just, here's an opportunity, let's start the show?
That was just a job. My first job was at a bookstore as a bookseller in Harvard Square for about 5 years, at Wordsworth Bookstore. And then I became interested in becoming an English high school teacher. Actually went back to school for that, and did a little bit of teaching. And one of the things that happened that I learned about myself while I was teaching was, and at this point in time, I did want to be a writer. Although I was primarily writing poetry, short stories. But I learned pretty fast that if I was going to be a teacher, I was going to have to give up being a writer, that those two were not compatible to one another. It just took too much time and energy to be a high school English teacher, and I was wiped. Between the lesson planning and the grading and all that, I just didn't have any energy left or brain space. And I kind of fell into a job as a kind of an administrative manager at a nonprofit in math and science, which was not a subject that interested me. So that was not a dream job, and except for the fact that it was a 9 to 5 job that paid me enough to live on and left me with time and kind of brain space to keep writing. And I think, my first 7 books were written while I was working in this company, either writing in the morning or in the evenings. And so in some sense, I think that's maybe good advice for aspiring writers in a way, is get a job that you like enough, but that doesn't take all your time and energy. Because I still had, that left over at the end of the day.
And so, you talk about your first 7 books, the first being, and it has quite, if my research is correct and from what you've spoken on is correct, then it was a journey and a half for it to finally get out there. But do you remember the whole process with getting The Girl with the Clock for Her Heart, which was your first work out in the world published?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I didn't really start writing mystery novels until I was in my mid-30s. I just wanted to see if I could do it, if I could write a complete novel, if I had the stamina for that. And I wrote 3. I wrote 3 unpublished books. 2 were in a mystery series. 1 was a standalone. And I got in some interest in them from agents, and at one point some interest from an editor, but it had all kind of fallen through. And the last book I had written, which was my standalone thriller, was called The Bridal Party. Maybe the only book that I'd written that I thought was commercial. In other words, I thought it had a good enough hook that I'd be able to sell it. And I got no interest in that book at all. So, we're talking sending out 50 query letters to agents and getting 50 no's. So I was discouraged. I mean, not overly so. I mean, I know this is a really hard field to break into. But at that point in time, I had sort of told myself this is what I like to do, and I was just going to keep doing it. And after The Bridal Party, I wrote a really, what I thought of as a sort of strange novella. First of all, novellas don't sell because, a novella is about 100 pages. It's too short to be a novel. It's too long to be a short story, and they tend to not have a market for them. But so I kind of just wrote this one for myself. It was what I think of as a very noir story, like a film noir type of story, but it was set amongst college freshmen, college age freshmen, so or freshman age college students, and I wrote it just for myself. Really, I did publish it on a e-zine, and that's how I found an agent. My current agent that I've had for my whole career read that novella online, oddly enough, and wrote me an email and said, I love this story, and I think maybe you could turn it into a novel. And that's the start of that. I mean, it took a year. I was a year with my agent before he even sent it out to submission, working on this book, turning it into a novel, the whole time thinking this is going nowhere, that it's still, getting an agent is a huge step in a writing career. It's important. It's actually necessary, but it doesn't guarantee publication. So, eventually my agent got a 2-book deal at William Morrow Books, where I'm still at, and sold Girl with a Clock for Heart in my second novel, which is The Kind Worth Killing.
Yeah, and so on The Kind Worth Killing, so that was where my introduction to your work came in. I think the series, as many do, is very interesting because you meet your first 2 characters, and I like the way they're set up because you don't meet all the characters in the first section of the book. You get your introduction, you get your first couple, but then all of a sudden behind the scenes, we're going full perspective. We
Yeah.
get 2 people plotting with one another, but then all of a sudden we didn't know that the other people were plotting. And then as you set the tone for the series, you get Henry Kimball, the other half of the title sneaking in the third section of the book. But with
Right.
that said, and with the series, this being the first of yours that I've read and kind of running through the list, what was it for you about the style and then kind of the twists at that midpoint and throughout that kind of really just kind of kept things going?
In all honesty, I mean, the way I write books is I don't overly outline. I don't really tend to outline at all. So, I'm not always sure what I've got even when I begin the book. What I usually have is characters and a premise. In this case, I knew about my character of Lily Kintner, and I knew about Ted, and I knew that they were going to meet on an airplane and they were going to discuss murder, and then it was going to go from there. And along the way, the process of writing that book, I kind of kept painting myself into corners and then kind of sneaking my way out of them. And I think, as you said, it kind of switches characters. I mean, I'll say without giving too much away that Lily at one point in my writing of the book was going to be more of a minor character, and she turned out to really be the major character and has since gone on to become a major character in a couple other books.
Yeah.
She kind of became that way. Like, she just got more and more interesting to me as a character. I think everything kept kind of falling into place, and it was a hard process to write, but I think in the end it wound up with some really good surprises that surprised even me along the way, and I think that's what helps them surprise the readers. I think that process of writing without an outline for me is crucial. Like, I think it makes for better books. For me, it's different for everybody, but for me, it's like keeps them fresh. I'm not sticking to plot points. I'm not trying to. I'm kind of letting the characters decide the action more. That type of writing can also backfire on you, and you can wind up halfway through a book with nowhere to go, which has happened to me in the past. So I think, it's a double-edged sword, but it tends to work for me.
And then what is it, Peter? Well, it is familiar territory for you. What is it about New England as a whole that it has just made for such exciting stories when you've told them? I mean, it covered all the states, of course. You got Connecticut, you got Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire.
I don't know if I have much in Vermont. I think, and I love New England. I grow up here. I currently live here. I'm particularly fond of the coast of Maine. I just think it's kind of a gothic feel to the whole thing, especially Maine seaside. The weather is moody. It's dark a lot of the year. I mean, it has a good vibe that way. But primarily I read it because I live here, and I think if I moved somewhere else, I would probably eventually switch to writing about that area. It's just where I am all the time. So yeah, and I've always loved a good New England mystery. So.
And then also, and some authors do this, some use real schools and universities, but how do you go about kind of creating these fictional towns and fictional colleges and universities within different parts of New England? Especially, when you talk about, and not, again, no spoilers, talk about Lily's beginning at the school that you created.
Yeah, at Mather College.
Yes.
Which is a poor stand-in, or not a poor stand-in, but a kind of obvious stand-in for Trinity College in Hartford. The dining hall at Trinity was actually called Mather. That's where I got the name. The reason I do that, and some places are real. I mean, obviously Boston is a place I've set books before, and that is the real place. And then I kind of make up smaller towns and universities, partly so I can have control over them. That I can, if, for instance, Mather College. So first of all, if at Mather College, I can put things where I want to put them. I can put like a local bar near the Southeast campus, and no one's going to write me and say, there's no bar there. So I can kind of it becomes a kind of a fictional playground that I can kind of mess around with and make it my own. And I'm also not going to get in trouble for like, quoting a real college where, tons of people are killing one another often in that college, or in Kennewick, Maine, which is a made up town in Maine that I use frequently. So yeah, I mean, it's partly fun too to make up your own towns, but it's really just an author's way of controlling that geography.
And the other reason I also mentioned is having read The New Neighbor from Carter Wilson, he added Barry, New Hampshire, and then created the whole story. And I know you'll see it a lot in the genre. It's very cool. It's about 475 pages, couple page chapters, and a town in New Hampshire. So kind of a similar vibe to
Yeah.
what you were going for in there. And so on that other note, talking about Carter Wilson and some others, Peter, which current authors do you still draw inspiration from as you produce your yearly novels?
A bunch. I mean, I read, in terms of contemporary novelists, I mean, I love Anthony Horowitz, who's an English writer who writes quite clever mysteries set in England. He has a series where it's set in a book world, and there's often a book within a book. So there's a mystery novel that is sort of clue to solving the larger mystery, and he includes that. So I find him great, and I tend to read his new books. And then the other writer that I really like is Janice Hallett. She's another English writer. She writes contemporary mysteries, often cleverly telling the story using like emails and text messages and things like that, which I love. She just does a really clever job with that. So I like both of them. And then honestly, I do read a ton of older mysteries. I always say, like, I prefer my authors dead. So some of my favorites are obviously like Agatha Christie, who I still dip into her books, Ruth Rendell, P.D. James, two other sort of golden age. Well, they came after the golden age of mystery writers. They're both now dead, but they wrote great series of books. I love John D. MacDonald, who's a American writer of what you might call pulp fiction, kind of paperback novels from the 60s and 50s of last century. And, I love to go back into sort of vintage crime for inspiration. It's just always interesting to me.
And with your process, you write 1,000 words a day, 7 days a week, doesn't matter the weather, the situation. And so it can take a lot of time. Some people get writer's block, but what have you been able to do kind of over these years to just lock in and ensure that Peter Swanson, 1,000 words a day, boom, today won't be any different?
I mean, it's necessary. So, and I will say that, I always say that. I mean, it's true. There are times, though, when I'm not working on a book. But when I'm working on a book, it's really crucial to do that 3.5, 4 pages or 1,000 words every day, because otherwise you're waiting for the mood to strike you, or to feel like, oh, today's a good writing day. And I think if you do that, you're just going to wind up not having enough good writing days. So you just have to sort of treat it like a day job. And I think that's really, really crucial to finishing a book. And writing is all about finishing. I mean, if you want to be a published novelist, you need to get your works to a place where you're like, this is ready to be published. This is a story that is completely told. I mean, and to get to the end of a 350-page book, it's a lot of work. So it's if I just did it when I felt like it, I probably wouldn't finish books.
And so, similar note, but we talked about the girl with a clock for a heart, and you talked originally about the issues with novellas sometimes, but you do have two. What was the inspiration with the Christmas Guest, and how do you think that kind of stacks up?
Well, I was really lucky to get to do the Christmas Guest because it was actually my UK publisher suggested it. He asked if I wanted to write a book that would be sort of a Christmas crime thriller. These are quite popular in England. They come out, at the season in the same way that like Christmas movies come out every year. Christmas crime is more of a thing over there. And he said, you can do anything. You can make it cozier than you usually make your books. You can make it shorter. It can be novella length, anything you want to do. And I had this story that I knew would make a great novella. And I loved writing. I love that length, actually. I actually think it's a really good length for thriller novels. Oftentimes there's a lot of pressure to write 350-page books. Sometimes that's too long for some thriller ideas. Like it's just, you're going to have to do subplots. You're going to have to do dual time narratives. And ultimately what you have to do is pad out the story. And sometimes that just bogs it down. So I wrote The Christmas Guest really for my UK publisher, although my American publisher liked it enough to publish it as well. Yeah, it did well enough that I'm doing another one. So my next book coming out, it won't be this Christmas, but next Christmas will be another Christmas novella.
Is it in the same worlds, or is that going to be separate?
No characters. No, it'll be a totally new story. Sometimes I think all my books take place in the same universe, but it'll be a new story. It'll be set at Christmas. It'll be roughly 100 pages, which I think is a nice length for like something you could read on Christmas Eve in one sitting, take you 2.5 hours. And yeah, that's the plan.
And so all that, we talked about style, we talked about the different works and processes. So Peter, what would you say is your advice to those who want to become authors?
Yeah, I think I already said it, but I think the most important thing is treating it like a job and writing when you're not in the mood to do it. Now, I say, so for instance, I do 1,000 words a day. You don't, and other writers, Stephen King does, I think, 5,000 words a day. He can sit there for more hours than I can. I think so I would say just pick your number. Maybe you're busy working. Maybe you don't have a lot of time. So maybe it's 200 words a day or 1 page a day or something like that. Like it doesn't have to be a large amount, but if you do that every day, eventually you'll get to the end of something. So that's my advice. And the other thing I would say is in this process, especially if you're trying to write a novel or short story, be aware that probably what you'll write is not good. The first draft is, you have to allow yourself to write a bad first draft, and to keep going and get to the end, and not despair over that, because you can go back and fix it. So I would say those are the most important advice, but it's really just a matter of doing it, letting yourself be bad, and getting to the end of things.
And one other thing, kind of similar note, and maybe you don't have a direct answer before we get into the get to know Peter Swanson section off of just writing. Is there a universe that you've most loved kind of creating? A specific book maybe that as you're going through it and coming up with it, you're just really enamored with what you're able to kind of make and create? Like maybe this one is the premier one?
Yeah, I don't know. I think the book that was most fun for me was 8 Perfect Murders, and it's about a bookseller who has created a list of his favorite murders in crime fiction, and he's published it, and someone else is using it to create real murders. And what I loved about that was it was really set in the book world, and it was a lot about reading, like I talked about before, vintage crime fiction, historical crime fiction. So I loved being immersed in that world of books and thinking like that main character, Malcolm, who's this sort of, he's not quite me. There's some darkness to him, but in terms of him being a reader, he was kind of similar to who I am.
Very, very exciting read. Obviously, no spoilers on that. That I will say was a really great reveal. And when we did get to it.
Oh, thank you.
Of course. All right. So we'll skip ahead a couple questions about yourself and the North Shore, and then we will sign off. Peter, what book release are you most anticipating reading in 2025? Of course, other than everybody that will go read Kill Your Darlings, your latest, but other than that book.
Well, I just read a book called Gabriel's Moon by William Boyd, which is kind of like a spy novel with a mystery attached to it. And I just found out that, and I loved it. And I just found out that there is going to be a sequel coming out in November called The Predicament with the same character called Gabriel Dax. He's a really interesting character. He's a travelogue writer in the 1960s who gets recruited to become a spy for MI6 in England. And I don't know, they're quite good. So I'm excited to read that in the fall.
Okay, it's going on the Rex list as we speak. The best pizza, in your opinion, on the North Shore of Massachusetts?
I love a place in Gloucester, Mass called Short and Main. It's got, a great pizza oven, wood-fired pizza oven. And they do great sort of classic Napolitan, that style of pizza with that almost burnt crust, which I love. And what's fun about them is they also do oysters. So they're kind of an oyster in a pizza place, Short and Main in Gloucester, Mass.
And then have you had the sweet sauce of Little Italy in your travels in Beverly?
Not a fan of the sweet sauce.
Okay.
I gotta say, and it's funny. My wife likes it. Yeah, not a fan of the sweet sauce. Too sweet for me.
Okay. Favorite food to cook?
I kind of like it all, but I'm gonna say roasting something in the wintertime or the fall. So we'll go with like roast chicken. Partly it's the smell that it creates in the house, and I love roasting a chicken with a bunch of vegetables and some potatoes. That kind of food on a wintry day is nothing's better.
And so you're out there in the kitchen, when you're not writing, you're still using the hands. They're still.
Yes. Always. Yes.
And what would you say? And again, this is probably the hardest question to ask somebody that creates these every year, that's in the weeds, but do you have a favorite murder mystery that's not yours that you've read over the last 3 years?
Yeah, I'll say I mentioned her already, Janice Hallett. So she and the name of the book is it's called Killer Question. In fact, it's not out yet. I think it's out this month, maybe. And I was sent an early copy and I've blurbed it. It's really clever. It's set among a pub trivia night. So a weekly pub trivia night, and you get to know all the teams and you get to know them through. And then there's this murder that happens, in connection with this trivia night. But it was just a very clever book. A really fun look at people who play trivia in bars, which is something I've done for years. So I was partly liked it for that reason. But yeah, that was very good.
Have any of your books ever been used as questions while you've been there?
No. No. Well, that would be a moment. No, not yet.
Okay, it's coming.
All right.
I can't say it's going to be from me, but if I have the opportunity, I will make sure.
So if you run a pub trivia night, you'll include me. Thank you.
I got you. So last question before I give you a chance to plug anything coming up. Are there any of your books that are in the process of becoming shows or movies at the moment? Yeah,
a few actually. And when you say in the process, it often doesn't happen. I mean, a lot of books are optioned. Options means they're sort of working on turning it into a movie or television show. And 1 out of 100 or so get made. So, but I will say right now, lots going on. They're working on a movie for 8 Perfect Murders. They're working on a TV show for Kind Worth Killing. That would be on Hulu, I believe. And most excitingly, my new book, Kill Your Darlings, they're working on a movie right now, writing the script. But it was optioned in part by Julia Roberts, who wants to play the lead. Which is very exciting because obviously she's a big movie star, but also when you get an actor involved in a project, it has a much better chance of happening. Oftentimes that's what stops a project from happening, is not getting actors involved. known actors. So that's happening as well.
That is a lot to be excited about in
I
2025,
know.
the next couple of years.
I know. Well, I keep my expectations low because these things fall through.
Sure.
So I try not to get, too excited about the possibility.
And so, as we do sign off, one more exciting thing, Peter. Anything to plug? Why everyone should go read "Kill Your Darlings," and then maybe any appearances you might have coming up.
Not a lot of appearances coming out. I think I'm going to be in Connecticut in August. That's the only thing booked right now. I've done a couple appearances locally here in Massachusetts for Kill Your Darlings, which is my new book. Came out in early June. It's a murder mystery that goes backwards in time about a couple with a very, very dark secret. So, check out my new book. Check out my website at peter-swanson.com. And, memorize some facts about me so that you can win your trivia game at the pub trivia.
And then I guess my last question for you, because you've created so many brilliant fictional characters, towns, colleges. If you were to create a fictional bar that would have a question that would ask the first Peter Swanson question, do you have an ideal name for the bar and what that would be?
How about we go with, it could be an homage to the bookstore in 8 Perfect Murders. So the bookstore in 8 Perfect Murders, which was a mystery bookstore, was called the Old Devils, which I think is good. So we'll call it the Old Devils Bar. How about that?
All right, Old Devil's Bar. How many novels has Peter Swanson published since 2017? Boom, da-da-da. There's the music. There's the music hint. The answer will be revealed on the next podcast. But
All right,
Peter,
yeah,
hey,
make it happen. Make it happen.
we're doing it. But a pleasure, Peter, having you on. Looking forward. I haven't gotten into Kill Your Darlings yet. Excited to get into that and finish out the rest of the list and go back to the beginning. So I still have to get to Girl with the Clock for a Heart. I got to really restart. I think the last two I got are your first and your last. But thank you for the appearance and excited to continue to follow your career.
Thank you, Zach. A pleasure.
All right. We will see you next time, folks, on Zach with an H.